reminds me so much of my very first presentation in Waikiki. It was the last session of the last day. And you know, there are many things to do in Waikiki. So I showed up in my class ready to present, and there was one person there, the other presenter. And since then, for me, anything more than one is a bonus. So I want to thank you so much for being here, the last session of the last day. I've really enjoyed the 2 days, and I have especially enjoyed our conversations. Looking at learning as a sacred endeavor and enjoying this higher space together. It's been exhilarating and inspiring for me. I want to thank the Center for Learning and Teaching and all their efforts to put this together, and hope we have more. As teacher educators in the School of Education, we have students from many regions and cultures, and we felt that the need for responsive instruction involved more than just developing an awareness or an appreciation for the various cultural groups. And so we wanted to know, what do we need to know about our teacher candidates to improve the instruction they receive? And we asked the question, what do we need to know about you to help you learn? The aim was to help us and our learners think about learning and focus on what they see as important to their learning. What sparks their curiosity or stimulates their intellect? What helps them to mentally engage, explore, discover, alter, or accommodate? And of course, question. The important thing is that we were asking the question. This shows our student demographics from our last graduating class. And we will look at our data and our sources. Turn this over to Colleen.
So, as Colleen said, this was our data source. We just asked a very simple question on the first day of class. And each student provided 2 or 3 responses. And what we're presenting today is just from a subset of about 60 students. We have about 1,000 responses, but this is just a very small snapshot. So we analyzed the data informed by our guiding question here. And our unit of analysis was a complete related idea. So sometimes it was just a phrase, and sometimes it was several connected sentences. But that's what we analyzed. And then what we actually coded, or our unit of coding, is the response to the question. We used thematic or inductive thematic analysis, which essentially means that we read and reread the data, and we created case notes. We had summaries and selected quotes of the data, and then we looked into these to identify some themes or some big ideas or some patterns that were driven by the data. We have 3 key findings. Our students identified learning preferences, or things that they felt they needed to learn well. They also identified some things that they felt they struggled with as learners. And then they gave us what we call learner identity labels, or specific ways that they think about themselves as learners. So the first one, learner preferences. The students preferred clear, organized, interactive instruction that included thoughtful uses of texts. So for the clarity of instruction, they felt that instruction was clear when they could ask questions, when they could hear stories, and when they were provided explanations. Here are some representative statements by our students. Sometimes explained in a simple way, I'll get it easy. I like hearing stories and examples, helps me connect theories and concepts. And don't get mad if I keep coming to you and asking questions. Now, we thought these were really interesting responses, particularly the one that talks about stories and examples. In education, we're kind of seeing retreat's the wrong word, but moving away from grand theory and a rejection of grand theory in favor of stories and practice. So oftentimes the stories teachers say carry more weight than the actual of the lesson, then why do I need to know who came up with the theory in the first place? Given the place of story, we actually thought that they would respond, that this would be we would have more students that would respond this way. What we find interesting about the last statement here is we see the students looking for an instructional space to ask questions, looking for an instructional space where it's okay to not get it the first time, where it's okay to be confused, where it's okay to say, can you please say that again? Where they don't feel like they're being, what's the right word, put on the spot, if you will, if the question's not perfect, or if they don't understand something. The assumption we see here is that the students felt that the content that they were engaging with was difficult and they needed some clarification. They also talked about the course organization. They felt that a course needed to be organized, there needed to be breaks, and that there needed to be some variety in the courses. So if we move down to the second one, they thought that it was important for them if the course kept what they called a fairly stable schedule so they could manage their time. We see this as perhaps an avoidance of change, an intolerance of change, a way of managing the time pressures that many students are under. This also may be an unwillingness or an inability to handle ambiguity. They want it straight. They want it exactly the way it's supposed to be with no deviation. Then we get the last one. I learn best and enjoy learning when there are a variety of projects. We see this as an argument from the student's perspective for structural arrangements of learning. So instead of doing one thing, try a couple different things, different activities or projects that might help more students get to the same end in slightly different ways. The students also were effusive, I would say, about an interactive classroom. They said repeatedly things like this. They underlined these words, they bolded them, they put them in capital letters. So they were pretty clear that they liked a classroom that was interactive. So let's look at the last one here. Class discussions are great. They stimulate new ideas and help connect prior knowledge to new knowledge. And to me, this relates to what Brian Kinghorn just talked about with questions, with discussions. They recognize that discussions were a meaningful way for them to make sense of the material. We see this as students asking to help them construct knowledge, not to simply open their heads and pour something in, but to give them the time and the space and the opportunities to create knowledge that wasn't in them before they came to the class. And then they talked about the importance of using text thoughtfully. So they said things like, I learn well through reading, I learn best when I can see things written out, and I need to know what readings can be skimmed and which ones I must thoroughly read. We were also interested in these responses because we see here the students asking us, their professors, to use the course text in a more thoughtful way. Not just to give it to them and say, have at it, but to do something meaningful, to maybe frame it a little bit. I had a student ask me the other day how to read the textbook. And I thought, you know what? I had not even imagined explaining to him how to read the textbook. So I said, well, you read the first part, and then you look at the boxes, and then you go back, and then you read the text to help you understand what the boxes said. And his eyes lit up and said, oh, I can do that. That's an example of the student needing some instruction or some guidance to thoughtfully use the text that he'd been given. A well-respected literacy scholar, John Guthrie, said recently that texts are, quote, the single most powerful ally for our students to gain content knowledge. And I think that's striking, that he sees the power of text and the way entirely different situation. And our students felt that they struggled engaging with these academic texts. And that makes sense because recent data suggests that the last 2 years of high school do almost nothing to develop students' reading and writing skills. But the difference between a 12th grade high school text and a beginning college text is about 1.5 standard deviations, which is about 4 grade levels different. And that's not even including the science and the engineering texts and the math texts, which are probably even more complex for our students. So we see here our students asking for help to make sense of these very complex texts that they have. So we asked a couple questions here. Do our students have the tools to negotiate these texts? Do they have the tools to make sense of the different representation of the material that they're learning? We see the second statement here. I don't like reading boring texts, meaning that if you can say it in less words, then why not say it in less words? As a representation of our students diminishing reading stamina. At some level, they just stop having the ability or the stamina to engage with these dense texts page after page after page. And then here's our last finding. Our students identified ways that they thought about themselves as learners. These are characterized by I am statements. And the two big I am statement patterns that we saw were I'm a visual learner and I'm a struggling literacy learner. So we weren't too surprised by their statements about being visual learners. And these sounded pretty much the same. I'm a visual learner, I'm extremely visual, and visual aids can do miracles for me. So if we look at the last one here, or the last one. So this idea of the power of visual aids is striking. So we see that perhaps this may be related to the rise in visual culture and the difficult nature of the informational text that our students are engaged with. So just think back to the brief characterization I gave of informational text, and it's not surprising then that about 80% of students consider the text that they're reading boring, and they go out of their way to avoid reading them. They go out of their way to put minimal effort into making sense of these texts because they don't have the skills to engage with them. And if they don't have the skills to engage with the text, then they don't have the skills to make sense of the material. And then we move to the last one. They identify themselves as certain types of literacy learners, and these were overwhelmingly negative. They made negative statements about their ability to engage in literacy tasks. So they said things like, I'm not a fast reader, I'm a very slow learner, and I hope that my English is good enough to understand all of the course, but I'm not that good. And things like, I'm not the greatest speller. Again, we see here students situating themselves in terms of their deficiencies as learners. And we see in here a troubling relationship between who our students think they are and their ability to engage with the material that's so critical for their success. So moving on to some implications. We think that there may be an implication for the importance of understanding what our students are trying to say and allowing that to inform, not necessarily drive, the instruction that we provide them. Perhaps we can think about the assignments that we give them or how we actually instruct them in terms of what they have told us about who they are and what works for them as learners. So we also think there may be some implications in here for the role of literacy. So we may ask the questions, how much attention are we paying to our native and our non-native speakers of English? Are they different types of learners? Do they demand different things from me as an educator? And if so, what might they be? We also think there are some implications here for selecting and using texts. So how do we select our texts based on who we're teaching? How do we use our texts based on the types of students that are in our classrooms? If we know that they struggle with text, do we approach them differently than the students that we know that don't struggle with text? Also, we may ask ourselves questions about the explicitness of the literacy instruction that we're providing our students. Do we give them the text and say, have at it? Do we expect them to infer how to engage with the course material? Or are we explicit about how to do these things in relationship to who they are and who they think they are? We also think there may be some implications in here for who our students are as learners. Perhaps we need a clearer understanding of who they think they are when they're in our classroom, and how that coheres with who they think they are in other classrooms in other places. Perhaps we may be informed, or our methods of instruction will be informed by who our students are. I had a student recently, when I put a definition on the board, he asked me, do I need to write this down? And I said, well, why do you ask that? And he said, well, I need to know how you're going to test. And I said, what if I told you I'm going to ask you to reproduce that definition on the test? He said, well, I would write it down. And he said, what if I told you that on the test I was going to ask you to tell me the definition and then explain how you would apply it in your own classroom? And he said, I would write it down and think about it and talk to my colleagues about it. And I said, it's the latter. And so I thought that was a really interesting conversation about the student trying to manage his learning and the text and the discipline all at the same time. The student dropped the class, by the way. So when we ask our students things like, what do I need to know about you as a learner? We're honoring who they are and who they think they are, and we are also developing knowledge in ourselves as educators about how we can draw from their experiences with learning to improve the quality of the instruction that we provide them. Now, we are not making an argument that what students say we should do. That's much too simplistic. But we are making an argument that when we know more about our students, it allows us to be more responsive instructors.